Hello learners, today we are going to look at the next module, next part of our presentation on novel writing techniques. And as we discussed in the previous two sessions, this is something that is part of a specialized process where we not only learn about the genre, what novel is, but also how it is conventionally written and what are techniques that are involved in the making of novel. Of course, we know that this is a creative process and each novelist or each writer of fiction will have his or her own creative process. So in a way, this is something which comes from within, but there are certain patterns, there are certain processes which you can look at, which you can employ, through which we can move towards some of the fundamental dimensions of this genre, of making this genre work. So we are going to look at not only how we can embark upon the journey of writing novel or writing fiction, but we are also going to look at how we are placed in terms of publication and review. So let's start. So the first thing to note is that storytelling or fiction writing or novel writing deals with the process of communication. So we are looking at how we can present compelling stories that hold the attention of the reader. And for that, we need to work on the power of storytelling, because storytelling is one mode through which you can communicate, through which you can connect, through which you can engage the reader and create worlds that make sense to the people who are outside the writer's domain. For instance, the writer will write and then the writer will create a world which will be individualized, but once it enters the domain of the public, domain of the reader, then the reader starts finding something of value in that space, in the space of the world which is created. So in a way, the world is created by the writer, but the world is that which the reader finds to be significantly worth connecting to. So a created world becomes real through the process of storytelling. And we know that novels or fiction or stories have characters. So characters form part of the whole process of storytelling. That means we have in storytelling action, we have plot, but we also have characters. And these characters become real through the process of storytelling. So the major priority in transferring the world of fiction to the world of the reader involves creating characters, creating a world, and compelling storytelling processes through which that becomes real, even though we know, as the term states, it is fiction. Now, one of the focuses that we need to work on is to develop a protagonist. So the protagonist or the central character, there may be more than one character who occupies that space, but usually there is a central character or more than one, and these characters or central protagonist or someone who moves the story, or the story is about that person, that person's experience, that person's situation. That is something that the writer needs to develop. So how do we develop that? We create relatable goals through which these protagonists can be connected through the writer's pen to the world of the reader. So we need to create protagonists who have these goals which are identifiable, relatable, and credible in the eyes of the reader. And for the story not to be flat, that things are dull or not flat, for that, to make it vibrant, for that it is essential, it is important to create a sense of internal conflict. That conflict may be psychological, that conflict may be related to interpersonal, but that conflict creates a lot of avenues for the writer to develop the protagonist. It can be through some kind of dialogue, through some engagement, through some tension, but that is very important in developing the protagonist. So if the protagonist is flat or single-sided, then the multidimensional aspects of the protagonist are not drawn into the picture. then the protagonist needs to grow and change. So it is the process of transformation that interests the reader. There must be some kind of transformation that is taking place in the mind of the protagonist or the situations in which the protagonist finds himself or herself. So there are changes, there is growth, and that becomes a matter of great interest to the reader. Now, protagonist or making the protagonist work relates to the process of characterization. So how do we create characters? Now, characters do not exist in a vacuum. We know that characters exist through a process of socialization. That socialization can also be in relation to the relationships the character has with other characters. Then we need the history and background of a character. Where does the character come from? How does the character emerge? What kind of society the character belongs to? What kind of culture that the character brings into the picture? And what are the motivations for the character's action? How are they acted upon, and how do they react to situations, and how that creates the picture of a society coming into being. So the society which is fictionalized may have historical dimensions, may have truth that we can relate to from outside the world of the fictional space. Now for that we need to have characters who are part of the picture, who may not be part of the protagonist's immediate world, but who relate to that world and who create that sense of society and social space, or that sense of history, or that sense of individuality through which the entire process of characterization populates the world of the novel. Now for that, we have to think of the character's placement. How are the characters or the protagonists placed? The characters or the protagonists are placed in terms of a plot, because the plot is the vital architecture of fiction. It is only through plot that we can see the different stages of the narrative developing. So these stages can be seen in terms of a 3-act formula. What is that formula? Of course, there can be different ways, but we can look at this as one of the conventions through which fiction writing is done. The first is setup. That means the first part is to introduce the characters, place them in a setting, and create the situation or atmosphere for conflict. Then, because of that, it leads to the next stage, the next process, that is rising action. So once there is rising action, there is the build-up of certain circumstances, and that creates interest of the reader. It creates for gripping action and interest, and it also contributes to what is known as character development. And the third part of the plot is the resolution of the conflict, or what the rising action is about, and that brings us to the end of the novel or end of the plot. And the end part involves falling action, or what is also known as climax. Climax means it resolves all the issues that are raised. It can result in something that is considered to be happy, or something that is considered to be sad or tragic, or sometimes it can end with certain questions. But then the plot is part of the process which facilitates that and leads to a resolution within the narrative. Now we can look at what is called the narrative perspective. That means, how is the plot being presented? What is the process through which the plot is being presented by the novelist? So there are, we know, different points of view. The novelist has to choose points of view. From whose point of view is it presented? Is it presented from the first person? Is the protagonist himself or herself telling the story? Or is it from the third person's point of view? It is someone who is outside the development? Or is it a third person who has limited access, who doesn't have complete access? So these are things which we have already discussed in our previous sessions, but this is something which the novelist must keep in mind, that the narrative perspective is crucial for the vision through which the story emerges to the reader. Now, for that process, narrative process to work, there is a crucial role to be played by conversation. We must have authentic and impactful conversations. We must have a character voice, which is something that is connected to the character. So the character must be seen to be credible, to be believable, and for the character voice or the character position and the articulation of the character must be such, must be seen to be such that it is reliable, it is believable. So reader can say, oh, this is something which we can relate to. So for that, the sense of authenticity, sense of believability, credibility becomes crucial. Now, the conversations that form part of the narrative, these conversations must flow naturally and must work in conjunction with the description or the non-conversational narrative. One objective of this is to create insights into the character. So how a character works, what is the psychological makeup of a character, how does the character believe, what are the character's priorities, what are things that are said and unsaid. These things can emerge through impactful conversations, and to create that, it is the domain of the writer, it is the domain of the novelist through which the writer actually works towards that. It's a process through which there is a convergence of the conversation and the narrative voice and the plot, where all these things come together to create a sense of credibility in the eyes of the reader. Now, when we talk of novels and when we talk of situations, we must also talk of how they are set and where they are set. We can have an urban novel, we can have a situation where everything is localized in the urban setting, or we can have a countryside setting, or we can write, say, as we discussed previously, we can write about science fiction, we can write about fantasies. But whatever the setting is, the setting by itself must have some kind of vividly enabled space. So that space must be valid within the narrative. If you're writing science fiction, or if you're writing about a crime scene, or if you're working on a thriller, if you're working on relationships or a romance novel, then the situation must be such that it is understood to be credible within that narrative space. So creation of vivid settings is extremely crucial for the novelist to make whatever is presented, the conversation, the narrative voice, and the plot, to emerge in the eyes of the reader as valid and workable. Alongside that, alongside the setting, we need something that drives the plot from one chapter to the next, from one section to the next, from one point to the next. So that is held by what we know as conflict. Conflict can be said to be the heart of the creative writing process. When there is conflict, then there is the scope for resolution, something that we looked at in terms of the plot. For the conflict to work, we need obstacles, we need roadblocks, we need hurdles, and then they are overcome. So how are they created? So hurdles must be presented inside the narrative. They can be internal or they can be external. Internal is something that works on the mind of the protagonist or the characters, and external is something that the protagonist has to respond to or react to and work upon. So these obstacles must be very, very carefully curated and planted in the narrative, so that the conflict emerges in a real sense to which the reader can relate to and work on in terms of the narrative progress. A story must have some kind of thematic concern. What is the theme? Is it a social novel? Is it a novel about individuality? Is it about love? Does it talk about death? Is it about relationships? Is it about isolation? Is it about some fantasy or dream? So these themes must be brought into the picture. So the conflicts that are presented are always valid when they are connected to the themes that are presented inside the narrative. So what we can now see, that there are these interconnected spaces where theme, plot, conflict, narrative voice, characterization all contribute to the overwhelming picture when the novel is created. So these points can be seen to be behind the scene elements which actually enable the writer to work on the technique. So when we're talking of novel writing techniques, these are the things that must be kept in mind by the creative artist or the novelist. Now, novel is different from a play, or novel is different from a poem, in that we have writing techniques. That means we are working on the process of description. We are working on the process of evolution. So from one chapter to the next, there is development. And this development is presented through narration. And narration involves describing. So we must describe. How do we describe? Because a novel is not a visual medium. So since it's not a visual medium, it's not about showing, it's also about presenting things through telling. And how is that telling done? It is done through a process of narration. We can look at different aspects by engaging different linguistic features, by verbalization, by creating visual descriptions, through which the picture that is sought to be communicated emerges in the mind of the reader. Now, this is something which is significant. The point I just made, it is that we must show and don't tell. That is, sometimes certain things are presented as if they are emerging in front of the reader directly. So that is how language is worked with. One we can look at in terms of descriptive language, and the other is action and dialogue. So we can have dialogue where there is a conversation, the conversation appears in front of the reader, two characters engaging, three characters engaging, and in that engagement the reader has direct access to what is going on in terms of the conversation. So there is no narrative intervention apparently, but this is a structured process, and this is structured by the novelist, where the dialogue is seen to be a window into the world of the protagonist or the character. Now, all novels do not have the same pace. Now, if we are looking at the thriller, for instance, if you're looking at the thriller as a genre, then thriller will have very rapid pace. If you look at something like the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown, then we can see that from page to page, from paragraph to paragraph, things are moving very fast. So the thriller actually works on a very rapid pace. So the nature of the writing must be pacey and racy depending on the genre. Sometimes if it's a contemplative novel where there's a lot of thought going on, where there's a lot of engagement, where there is a lot of thinking, where a lot of rumination, then we can see that the pace is slow. The language must be tailored to that. So the choice of theme and the creation of momentum is related to how it is developed by, or how it is worked upon by the novelist. We cannot have a thriller-like pace when you're writing a contemplative novel. So we have rising action, we have climax, we have falling action, and that is connected to the nature of this subject, the orientation of the protagonist, the nature of the characters. If we are writing a historical novel of, say, the medieval age, and if you're creating that space when there's a lot of action, then we may not have as much dialogue as we must have. We need to have descriptive narration where there's a lot of action. So this is very, very crucial for the picture to be seen by the reader to be credible, that this is a medieval world. If you're writing about today's world, if you're writing about city, then things can be different. So this is a choice to be made by the novelist. Now, how are we going to do that? How are we going to create that sense of momentum? What is the process? That process involves the introduction of these elements gradually. It can be abrupt. We cannot create things or characters or situations abruptly. Then the reader will not be in sync with the author's intention or the novelist's purpose. So we need to introduce these things gradually and create that sense of revelation of the plot, of the ideas, of the situations, and draw attention to the reader by keeping them engaged by exposition. And through this method, the reader will be interested in what is going on, would want to know what comes next. Now, this is a process that is crucial, which is employed by some novelists. It is called foreshadowing. What is foreshadowing? Instead of giving the thing entirely, there are certain elements which are dropped, certain hints that are given about what is to come, how things are going to work, just hints and clues. So it creates a sense of intrigue and suspense in the mind of the reader. And the reader is interested. If the reader is interested in that by what is given, the reader will try to actually keep pace with the novelist or keep pace with the narrative. They would like to, in a way, try to anticipate what is coming. So what intrigue and suspense does, what foreshadowing does, what creation of these elements prior to the novel's final climax these elements do, is to elevate the reader's engagement. The reader has greater engagement. The reader is more and more interested and reader tries to, in a way, see and come to terms with the reality of the end. Oh, this is how things are going to end, and this is how I'm going to find things. So for that, the writer creates this space, works upon this space by making them valid in terms of credibility. Now, this is something which certain novelists work upon, which is known as character arcs. That means all character journeys inside the novel will not proceed in the same way. For instance, we may have a marginal character who does not quite develop. That marginal character remains marginally located. But there are protagonists who undergo rapid change or undergo change from one extreme to another. We have characters who may be seen as villains turn out to be the opposite when the novel ends. Or we can have protagonists who are seen to be good turn out to be something else towards the end. So there is this transformative process in the journey of the character. Now, it is crucial to create that space inside the narrative where these characters are not of the same type. Otherwise, the character development and the people who make the novel will be of the same kind, and reader will lose interest. So, as we know, in great novels, in novels which are created by the great writers, they create characters of different kinds. These characters are different in terms of their orientation, their position, their development, their thinking, their culture, and their response. So some characters are slow in responding, some are very fast. We can see this through these different character arcs or through these different journeys made by the characters inside the narrative. Now, for the visual element to be created, the novelist must work on engaging sensory details. What are these details? The narrative must create a sense of sight, of what is seen, what is heard, and what is smelled. So for that, it can be done only through language. So that descriptive space inside the novel must give us a visual image, or give us a sense of sound, or give us a sense of smell. This can happen through a process of interrelationship between these sensory details, which are part of the setting, part of the location, and the creation of atmospherics. And it is true that the environmental space being worked inside the novel, it can be something that is inside a room, it can be about a chair and a table, it can be about the painting on the wall, but that is created through the narrative process which the writer works upon. So the point of view that we had referred to, how things are presented, must be seen to be connected to all these that we have discussed. That it must be something that is related to tone and style and the word choice. The choice of word is extremely crucial. If we are creating a very urbanized character, we must have the language tailored to that, suited to that. That language must be such that it creates that space, it creates that language which is connected to that world that the character is referring to or comes from. So the moment we look at that character, how the character behaves, we have an idea of the character's culture, the character's location, the character's priorities, and that can only be done through language or choice of word. So how a character emerges and what is the point of view taken, it is related to the style adopted by the writer in creating that narrative voice. Now, of course, in a novel, everything is not described. Everything is not presented as they are. Everything is not shown to be completely descriptive. So we have the role of symbolism or use of symbols. We have images which can be metaphoric. There can be, say, a vase inside a room which can indicate the sense of tragedy. We may have flowers which can be indicative of sense of joy. How they are incorporated, the setting, we may be talking about dreams and the setting of dreams. We may be talking of objects or some tonality, some natural things, some artificial things, the nature of the street, the nature of the people, the nature of the market. All of these can be indicative of some kind of conflict or some kind of situation, that may be mental, that can be cultural, or that can be external. So these are very, very powerful creative processes which are employed by novelists to create that sense of reality which may not be seen but which is indicative, and it is done through the use of symbolism. Now, when we have a straight plot, when we have one-dimensional plot, when we have one protagonist moving from one point to another, then we have what is known as the main plot. But novels which are very intricate can also have multiple plots, can have many plots. And these subplots all come together and arrive at a point where they converge. And it is in this convergence that the narrative weaving must be done. So when we have a subplot where we have certain things which are important to the main plot, and when they come together, then it creates a sense of intricacy, and that intricacy becomes crucial for the reader's impression about the novel. The subplots actually contribute to the fleshing out of the main plot. So when we look at it as a whole at the end of the novel, we find that all these subplots actually are relevant to the main plot. So by themselves the subplot may not have much, but together with the main plot, with the primary plot, they make greater sense. They create a greater and very, very valid emerging picture. Certain things are kick-started. What is kick-started? Sometimes we have sudden developments, and these sudden developments are unexpected developments. It can be some kind of conflict, it can be some kind of deviation, something that moves away, which is unexpected, which the reader did not think about, and that can be created by some kind of development. It can be a natural calamity, it can be a sudden news, it can be some kind of happy accident, and this is something which will create a sense of diversion, but also keep the reader interested, that it goes against the idea of predictability of the plot. The plot becomes unpredictable when there is inciting incidents that actually move the story forward. Now we come to what is very crucial in the rising action, in the sense that novel deals with a sense of drama. Drama in the sense that there is something that is happening, something that is of interest, something that is crucial, something that is creating some kind of tension. And that is created by the working of conflict, suspense, and obstacles on the path, which we have already discussed and looked at. Now, if the novel is moving forward from one narrative point to another, there must be some kind of resolution that the reader is expecting, or the reader's expectation can be thwarted by moving in another direction. The novelist can create that sense of climax by bringing all the points together, which may belie, which may go against what the reader expected, but it reaches what can be called an emotional apex. It can reach an emotional high. So the reader feels very much involved in what is going on through the narrative process where this climax is reached. And when this climax is reached, it's done through the process of confrontation, through the process of building tension, and the point where there is an emotional high that is reached by the development or by the working of the climax. Now, when there is resolution, when the conflict is resolved, then we come to what is known as falling action. What is falling action? Falling action is the tying of the loose ends. So before the climax, before the coming of the end, we find that there are a lot of things which appear to be unconnected. So what does falling action or climax do? It actually makes the consequences valid. It ties up the loose ends, and it actually creates that space for character growth to appear to be credible, that oh, this character has moved forward under these circumstances, and therefore it becomes validated by the falling action. Now, when the conclusion is satisfying, when the resolution is satisfying, and when the character growth and the loose ends are tied up, then the reader feels that, oh, I have had a very good read. It is a wonderful experience, because it gives a sense of life and reality in a lived world. Even though the lived world may be that of a thriller, the lived world may be that of crime, it may be a romance, it may be a fantasy, but then that everything tied up and came to a close in a sense that appears to be natural in that world. So the sense of naturalness that is created by the writer is, as we have seen, is done through a process of creative exercise. This is a creative exercise. This is something that is actually created and crafted in terms of a storytelling process. As we have seen, the plot, the theme, the creation of character, the role of the protagonist, the conflict, the use of the different symbols, the different elements related to sound, sense, and smell, all of these actually create a converging picture which comes to resolution. So in a way, when we come to a resolution, when we come to a conclusion, we may feel, oh, all these things are tied up. But as we have seen, behind all of these, there is a very, very critical process which the novelist works with. So in a way, the novelist is like an architect who is actually building a space where all the points are laid down on a table, and when it comes to an end, all of them actually converge and bring the reader face to face with a world or reality that the reader can find to be believable. And that is what makes a successful novel. So what are the things that are involved? What are we looking at? When we have finished our writing, we are looking at the manuscript. So in a way, we have a text, we have a narrative, we have a sheaf of papers where we are ready with our novel. But before sending it to the publisher or sending it to the reviewer, we need to look at certain very, very important aspects, and that is called revision. We need to look at grammar, we need to look at language, whether it is suited to the character, location, setting, culture. We can use colloquialisms. Are they valid? Are they appropriate? We can look at sentence structure. Are they suited to the character situation or the atmosphere? We look at word choice, and we look at what can be narrated and what can be used in form of conversation or dialogue. Then we need to, once we have finished writing and once we have checked all these things ourselves, in a way we become our own copy editors. So once we have done that, we send our novel or narrative to readers to read. Not readers who read after publication, but they are known as beta readers. Readers who actually have access to the manuscript, access to the narrative prior to publication or prior to it being sent to a reviewer, so that this feedback, which is real-time feedback, which is not determined by any external review, but on the basis of reading the narrative, this is extremely crucial. This is very valuable because it is untainted feedback. It is something which is not influenced. It is not something that is going to be influenced by some marketing process that some publisher can say this is a great book and people can read and have that feeling, oh, so many great people have talked about this, so it must be a great book. So this is not an influential feedback, but a feedback which will come to the reader, come through the reader to the writer. Not because it is published, but it is something that will come prior to publication. And this is something that brings the whole process, creative process, to one round, brings it to one whole. This makes it real in the sense that once this feedback is available, it gives the writer the scope to address the points being raised in this feedback process. So in a way, if there is some sense of inconsistency that a reader may feel, the reader point out, the writer may or may not accommodate. The writer will get a picture of the response, of the potential response, once the novel reaches the publisher and the market. Now, what are the options for the writer? There are, of course, two ways. One is traditional publishing. Traditional publishing means that the manuscript is sent to a publisher, it is sent for review, the publisher looks at the manuscript, it is worthy of publication, then of course it goes through the pre-press process, it goes through the reviewing process, and of course a literary reviewer is assigned to the novelist, and then the novelist takes it forward. On the other hand, there is self-publishing, where the publishing process is financed or done by the writer himself or herself through a publisher, and there the process is slightly different because the control of publishing is in the hands of the novelist. So these are different options. We see that many writers self-publish, and once the novel is accepted by the public, once it gains a market, then of course that is taken to the world through the market process. For that, we need to look at what is crucial. This is something which can be done only when the novel is finished. So once the novel is finished, we have what is known as editing. There is an editor with a publisher. The publisher will then look at some of the things which the reader may not be able to note, even the beta readers may not be able to note. So the editing process involves identifying and addressing weaknesses, tightening up and making the thing compact, making the narrative compact. It can relate to structure and pacing, it can relate to dialogue and description, it can also relate to character development. All these different elements can be commented upon by the editor. And this editor is someone who works with the publisher, and that this is not the editor we find who edits a book, but this is something who edits a manuscript. And this editor and the editor's point of view becomes crucial because it creates the first point of a response for the writer, because the writer is the first reader, and then when it goes to the editor will then identify and address these issues before it becomes publishable. Now, once it is published, or once it goes to the publisher, once the publisher says this is how it is going to work, then we have the next stage, which is crucial for the novel to reach the audience. It is something that is related to what is known as target audience. Is it written for children? Is it written for environmentalists? What kind of a target audience is being looked at? Is it written for social activists? Is it written for women? Is it written for historians? Is it written for people who are interested in reading history or fantasy? So identifying the target audience, then through that, once the identification is done, because this is known as bracketing. So once we bracket the target, and then we look at social media, and then we can use social media handles to promote the book in terms of the target audience. We can look at influencers and project it to those audiences who are likely readers or likely buyers of this book. We can do it through publisher's website and the blog, but we can also do it through individual engagements which actually draw attention to the market through some kind of promotion. Now, how do we create a sense of productivity? How is this done? Say once a novel is written, what is the next stage? How does it work? Or even in process of writing, if there is some writer's block, say there is a stage where the process is stopped midway, and we find that we cannot go forward, then these are certain steps that we can take. We can take a break, we can read something else, we can take a short vacation, we can change the environment, we can change the location, we can do some free writing, not connected, but just to have the flow going, or we can read other writers to get inspired and see how they have actually written to motivate ourselves in terms of the work which has stopped or which has come to a block. Now, writing, of course, depends on some very, very interesting aspects, and it is the setting of realistic goals. Set a deadline. How do we create a deadline? What is our expectation? How many words can we write in a day, or how many words can we write in a month? We can use these sections, and we can devise our own workspace and work methods. We need to develop a discipline to really work on that. So one of the things that we can do is to have a routine of writing. Apart from the other work that we do, we have a routine of writing that will enable us to keep track of our deadlines that we have set for ourselves once we embark upon the process of novel writing. Now, we need to keep on developing our craft. So for that, we need to look at creative writing workshops, we need to attend conferences, we need to do online courses. And of course, one of the things that a writer must do, always do, even if the writer is established or published, that is to read widely. Because only when you read can we have access to what is going on elsewhere, maybe in genres in which we have not published, in genres we are not writing in. If we are, say, interested in writing crime fiction, then we can read fiction about that deals with history or that deals with fantasy. So in a way we can see, oh, this is how what is going on, this is how the craft is moving forward. We can look at the progress of the genre, our own genre, by continuing to read and extend our horizons in terms of the knowledge that we acquire. Now, of course, it is very important to keep in touch with other writers, other novelists, through a process of networking and collaboration, and be part of a community, so that we are in touch with the world of creativity, not only through readers but also through writers, so that we engage and we know what's going on in the world of writers, not of the world of publishers, but of writers, and what are their priorities and what their thoughts are and how they respond to the kind of work that is available at the present time. Now, so the thing is to persevere, to keep on moving. There will be setbacks, there will be half-finished drafts, there will be novels which are stopped midway, but then the priority is, and the key is, to continue to struggle, because no writer has been, in history we have seen, has been able to write in one go and finish in one go. This takes a very, very elaborate, engaging process of self-motivation, of understanding, and of moving forward with the flow. Sometimes that doesn't happen, so we need not give up. We need to motivate ourselves to take us to the next step and embrace the struggle. So setbacks will be there. There will be different situations which may not seem conducive to the journey of the novelist, but then this is not to be seen as the wall that cannot be crossed. So this is, I think, what we can look at in terms of the techniques. Of course, we know that there are many other ways in which you can engage with. We can look at many aspects of novel writing. This is, of course, a very preliminary picture of how these techniques can be employed, or how these techniques can be utilized by the novelist who is embarking on the process of creating a new work. So that's all for today. Thank you so much.